Wayne Gilbert, 66, of Big Creek, Kentucky, passed away Saturday, August 16th, at his home. John was born in Hamilton, Ohio on July 1st, 1959, a son of the late John Henry and Carrie Jackson Gilbert. John was employed at the United States Forest Service, where he worked for 48 years. He's survived by his wife Lisa Gilbert of 42 years. He's also survived by his son, John Nicholas, and wife Heather, and by 3 grandchildren, John Liam Gilbert, Gemma Ray Gilbert, and Xavier Brian McConnell, and by his brother and sister, Mike Gilbert, and wife Mary, and Carolyn Hensley, and husband Dolly. In addition to his parents, John Wayne is preceded in death by his 2 sisters, Vonda Hobbs and Debbie Gilbert, and by his brother, David Gilbert.
So John Wayne started his career with the National Forest Service, or the U.S. Forest Service here on the Danube in 1977 as a youth conservation coordinator. Just to give everybody a little bit of perspective, the Redbird wasn't formed until 1965. Probably took it a couple of years to get up and running. So John came along at a pretty unique time in the birth of this ranger district in the Forest Service. John worked as a youth conservation coordinator in 77 and 78. The following April, John was hired at the Redbird as a seasonal employee and as a forestry worker position. After that first year, John worked multiple seasons as either a surveying aide, a forestry aide, or a forestry technician, doing work with silviculture, archaeology, timber, lands, recreation, and fire. John did a little bit of everything. A few years later, John was hired into a permanent timber marker position where he worked until he was hired as the lead timber marker. He took a leadership role in the daily job that he had done. John worked in this position for approximately 4 more years and then accepted the district timber sale administrator job, which he took a lot of pride in. He did that for 27 years. He did that job across the district, and a lot of the things that he did, he would go on details and do across the country. Early in his career, 1979, checking the records, he started his wildfire side of his job, and he did that on the side. We call it being a part of a militia, if you will. And he did that for many years. Back in those days, it was all hands on deck, probably more so than it is today. As part of the fire militia, John fought fire, like I said, on the Redbird, and he did it on a lot of other districts, on the forest, as well as in the region and across the country. John held many qualifications in fire. He was a crew boss, initial attack dozer operator, heavy equipment boss, advanced faller, firing boss, IC4, and a prescribed fire number. At one time, I was talking to some of the fire folks up at the SO. They said that John was probably the only person qualified in the district to run his own. So he ran a lot of fires, kind of in charge of a lot of fires at the time. So John worked on the Redbird for close to 48 years. During this time, John worked mainly on the Redbird, but like I said, other times helping where he could, where he enjoyed, all over the forest and other forests. In my 10 years on the Redbird, John has given me, a young first-time district ranger, much counsel and advice, not to mention sharing an extensive amount of knowledge that he carried with him that touched aspects of everyday Forest Service life. And John was looked upon on our forest as kind of a stalwart, mentored a lot of people, trained a lot of people. I was in Scott's office yesterday morning up at the SO, and there was actually a guy up at the Washington But the projects that you now see being implemented on the river are not only a result of a lot of hard work from our district, forest, and regional employees, but will also stand as legacy to John Wayne Gilbert's memory through the work that he put into them both on the ground and in the office. And like I said, such a mentor and trainer of many, doing work that he loved in a place that
Thank you, Bobby. I was teasing Bobby earlier, before we got started, that, Wayne, he wasn't a man of many words, but we always knew where the Rangers stood with him, at home, because little barbs or, zingers here and there let you know, whether or not he thought he had a good Ranger in the district at the time, or one that, had some things still to learn. And, he thought very highly of, Bobby Claybrook, and, I do too. We appreciate the kind words. It's hard. I was telling Donna last night, it's hard being a preacher, in a family when loss comes, because you get entrusted to try to do justice and, say some words that are, gonna fulfill the legacy, but also give some hope and some comfort. And, I'm not gonna preach to you today, but there are a few things, that I want to share with you, that I hope will be an encouragement to you, and also just do honor to, Michael John. Donna Rose, the only girl for most of, my lifetime, knew Wayne as the soft uncle. Jonathan and Ryan and, all the boys, would certainly disagree. We didn't have any soft uncles. They all were a little rough around the edges, and, we're all better men, for that, because we've got our rough edges too. And, how many know sometimes, there's a time for rough in the world, and I'm thankful that, we had some folks that instilled that into us. But, Donna was the only girl until, Emily made her way boomerang back from South Carolina, and my little Cameron, was born. So Donna knew him a little different than the rest of us do. And, I appreciated, just kind of getting to reminisce with her a little bit, about our Uncle John Wayne. But, I'm gonna try to get through this without getting, too emotional. And I said I'm not going to preach to you, but I did want to just share a few things. There's a theologian named Tony Jones that wrote of the gifts available when we encounter God in wild places. So I'm going to read a little excerpt, and then I'm just going to talk to you just a little bit, because he wouldn't want me to take too much time, I know it. But the excerpt says, "The God of wild places offers peace. In a modern world that's frenetic and busy, always connected, always on, finding peace is getting more difficult. And to receive the peace offered by the God of the wild places, we kind of have to go back to old technologies. Canoe and paddle, hiking boots, walking stick, bow and arrow, fishing pole. We also have to remember that the peace we long for is within. A spark of the divine that resides within each of us. And to bring that spark to a flame can be done indoors, but according to the theologian Tony Jones, he always had a whole lot more luck outdoors. And I found that to be true in my own life, too. It seems like God's a whole lot easier to find when we're looking up at the sky and looking at the trees and feel the dirt underneath our feet. And the God of wild places honors place. When we visit and we revisit the wild places that are special to us, experiences of memories and beauty are what we find waiting for us. For my Uncle John Wayne, caretaking that land was a joy and a privilege for which he took very seriously. The mountains, the creeks, the rivers, and all the creatures that lived in it, that was his company. That was where he was most comfortable, was when he was in the God of all places has given companions. And it may feel like, certainly family right now, that we're hurtling through space all alone, but we're not. Everything's all connected. And Wayne knew that, and I think he felt that connection when he was out on the job in the wilderness, or when he was working a fire with his father-in-law Brian. I know Brian served many, many years in the forestry, and he treasured that relationship that he had with Brian, the work relationship as a colleague, and also somebody that loved Lisa. They shared that, and he had companionship in the wilderness, and we can get that too. The God of wild places also requires risk. And just like a firefighter charging up the hill, or a smoke jumper jumping into unknown territory and unknown situations, life sometimes gives us opportunities to take a risk, to find ourselves out of uncomfortable situations, to walk through the fire that life has. And I know, family, that you're going to do that in the coming days, weeks, and months. You're going to find the courage to take that risk, to take that extra step, make that extra call, and go on living. It's not going to be easy, and I understand that. But the God of wild places also provides comfort. And just as Wayne, many times, I can imagine him, he had a certain way about him. He was very stoic, and he was very stiff, if you knew John Wayne. He was not a light-hearted guy, but he would throw out a few every now and then. But I can imagine him sitting somewhere in the woods, leg propped up on something, be it rock or log or tree, looking out under the brim of his hat, surveying what God had made, and thinking, what a privilege that it was to work in the land that he called home, that meant so much to him. I hope that in the coming days, coming months, and in this next season, that there'll be times for each of us that we get to look out over nature and sharing a little bit of comfort, look up at a night sky, little John, and see those stars, and remember those are the same stars that your daddy looked up and saw. Nature has a comforting effect on us, and the God of wild places provides that comfort, and I know he will for you, family. Now, before I close, and I told you I wanted to be short today, I'm not here to preach to you, just wanted to give honor. But before I close, Lisa did ask if I would invite anybody, if there's anybody else that has a word in memory of John Wayne that you would like to share. If you do, please come forward and we'll give you a minute of time.
Old men have a reputation for being stubborn, backwards, and often downright mean. As they get older, they decide they've learned enough about the world, and they don't need to learn another thing. That was not John Wayne. Not at all. I came here nearly 6 years ago, from college and a kid in many ways. I was afraid I was going to come here and find old men who had no patience for newcomers, who would treat my experience and the way I looked at the world with contempt and scorn. What I found was a kind and caring mentor, a man who was still curious and still learning, and even after 48 years on the job, he would tell you in the same breath how the old way of how things were done and why they were a bad idea in the first place. He would listen to your ideas give you feedback, not to smack you down, but to build you up with his hard-learned lessons that he learned over the years. He would take a new idea and try it, and be the first to tell you that it did a good turn. His experience and steady attitude inspired me, and made me say to myself, that's the type of old man I want to be one day. John will be missed as a teacher, as a mentor, and above all else, a friend. I will miss you, my friend.
Are there any others that have a word you'd like to share?
And I might just say a word from here.
Absolutely, Pastor.
I'm Dwayne Yost, and some know a lot of you, known John Wayne for many years. Pastor. And been pastor. Sister Lisa's been a member for many years, and we just want the family to know that we're thinking about them, that we're praying for them. And I just really want to say, you know, this is a time for all of us to test and examine our own hearts. Whether we like it or not, we're all going to die. And I had a sermon a couple of weeks ago that I preached where I said, prepare to meet thy God. You know, that's something we all got to do. We can't do it for each other, but we all need to make sure that we're taking time to examine our own hearts. So thank you for that. And if I can say a few words. I'm getting kind of old, but I'm glad I'm still able to get there.
Thank you, Pastor Ghost. Bobby Wayne may have been one of the longest tenured forestry members in the region. Pastor Ghost is probably one of the longest, if not the longest tenured pastor in the region. And, it's an honor to have you as pastor and have you share some words. I know it means a lot to the family, for sure. Is there any others before we close?
I would grant not only was Wayne one of our best friends growing up, but Mike and I started dating from the Forest Service. He moved from Wise, Virginia, here.